Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I'm at Prehm, Erik Skopil on the show. And Erik, it's middle of July. We don't have Jared on, technical issues there, but we're about 1 week away from all three of us consistently being on the podcast. Vacations are all about done. You and I are going to Vegas, leaving town in about 24, 28 hours at the time of this recording for Pac-12 Media Day. It's football is almost here. We've got a preseason all conference teams that have been voted on by the media. I was a voting member of that. We'll discuss that as in detail, our thoughts on the players selected, not selected from Oregon to those teams. We'll also dive into Pac-12 Media Day itself. You and I, like I said, will both be there. And it's going to be an interesting opportunity to speak with Bo Nix, with Jeffrey Bossa, head coach Dan Lanning, as well as some other individuals from across the conference. But Erik, hey, I'm just freewheeling here right now.
Let's do it.
How excited? How excited are you? Like, are you jacked up? I bumped into a media member yesterday. We were talking about going to media day on Thursday and the whole day on Friday, and football's coming here. And I'm excited. I'm ready for football, but you're fresher off vacation. I'm still kind of fresh off vacation. I'm still kind of in that I want to squeeze as much fun as I can before the grind of 7 days a week football starts.
I was just gonna say it's like kind of a, and I should also know I'd probably be a little more excited. I caught a little bit of a bug while I was on vacation, so I'm still kind of reeling from that. So I wish I was a little bit more healthy. I think I'll be obviously good by Friday, but yeah, in general, this marks the end of our summers basically, and which is means that we kind of lose some of that freedom of having days with a little bit more open time to go maybe hit the links,
Right.
as Matt will do, or I'll go out and play some basketball or whatnot. So we lose a little bit of that opportunity. But at the same time, it means football is here. I mean, that's what this Friday marks is football is coming up, and it starts what will be kind of the beginning of what will be, I think, a really fun fall. We've got Saturday Night Live, which will be on the 29th of July. There's a couple other events that signify the start with regards to media. I won't spill the dates there because I think we're still told not to. We're aware of some of the dates coming up here. So yeah, things are going to start kicking off, and it won't be too long here before the start of fall camp starts. And as Matt says, it will be full bore 7 days a week. The 24/7 sports moniker, which I'm wearing across my polo shirt. Let's see if we get the right side here. We'll feel more apt. So I'm fired up about that part, as you are, Matt. A little bit of mixed emotions knowing that the days are going to go from being a little bit more open to pretty full with fun stuff.
But once we get going, we'll be right into the thick of it, and I think we'll be enjoying it. Football is king. Football is awesome to watch, and football is awesome to cover. And so hopefully you're on duckterritory.com. Keep an eye out for a killer promotion that's going to be released here, depending upon when you're listening to the show. It could be live today. It could be live tomorrow, but you'll be able to get some huge savings on a membership to duckterritory.com. All right, let's dive into the all-conference teams, Erik. 14 Ducks were selected to either the first team, the second team, or the honorable mention. We've got two guys on the first team, offensive defense, from the Oregon Ducks. But real quick, I'm curious. Could you name the school that has the most players on first, second, or honorable mention? This kind of surprised me here a little bit.
So we're doing a total of all.
Total of all.
Most represented team. Okay. I know it's not Oregon.
Yes.
I'll go with Washington. I really haven't even looked too closely. What's the answer?
You're not correct. It is Oregon State.
That was my gut answer. It seems like a tricky one.
Utah led the conference with 6 first-team members. I don't think that's a surprise at all. They've got some studs across the board. But Oregon's 2 guys that made the first team. Bucky Irving made the first team at running back with the first team offense. And then Brandon Dorlus made the first team defense. I will note I was one of the voters who voted Brandon Dorlus defensive MVP for the season. He did not get that award, or I don't think he's got that award. Hasn't come out yet. But I don't know if there's really any issues here. My one issue is I voted Troy Franklin first team offense at receiver. I would have put him in there. But I have no issue with Rome Odunze. I have no issue with Dorian Singer. I think Singer's is maybe a little assumption of who he's playing for now, USC instead of Arizona.
Well, yeah. So the elephant in the room is that the quarterback situation where Bo Nix is not one of the first or second team guys. And just to address that, I think that's perfect. That's what it should be coming off of last year. Maybe perfect's too strong of a word, but like it adds up because Caleb Williams was the Heisman Trophy winner last year.
Yeah.
He was the Pac-12 Player of the Year. Michael Penix led the country in passing. Those are two players that are pretty unimpeachable, I guess, resumes coming into this season. Do I think Bo Nix can prove to be a better quarterback and have better seasons than both those guys? Absolutely. I don't, am I betting on it? I don't know. But do I think to start the season, this is the right order? I think it is. Bo Nix was honorable mention last year. These two guys return with, I think, very exciting offenses. I mean, you look at as Matt was kind of running through there, Troy Franklin being honorable mention receiver, you also feel like that's probably surprising or disappointing. But I mean, Rome Odunze and Dorian Singer are the first team receivers, and Jalen McMillan and Jacob Cowing are the second team guys. And if you go look at last year's Pac-12 receiving leaderboard, that's 1, 2, 3, and 4 in those stats. So, all the top guys came back. Troy was, I think, 6th or 7th in the conference in most receiving stats here. 6th in receiving yards. Those guys are all finished with more than him. So I get the frustration because I think Franklin is, again, like Nix, very much on par with these guys from a talent perspective. I think probably a better player than a couple of these guys. I do understand from a statistical perspective why they're both there. I will also say I would be really surprised if neither player is on the first or second team when the season's done. That would be a sign that the season didn't go the way it was anticipated it could go, because both those guys, if they have the year they're capable of, will be deserving of more than honorable mention recognition. But to your point, Matt, Franklin definitely could be deserving there. Nix could be deserving there, but there are also, in this case, really good candidates in the conference at those positions.
Well, it's like what we've talked about all off season at the quarterback room is like, or not quarterback room, and also just the depth of the league, that this is the best it's been in a long time.
Yeah.
You probably could say that for multiple position groups, that the league is just so loaded that Troy Franklin any other year would be a bona fide first or second team preseason pick. And it's hard for him to get in there just because of how good the receiving core is across the conference. One interesting note I took, I'm curious to see, this is maybe even a bigger picture here. I'm going to pivot just a little bit, but I had a hard time kind of justifying transfers from a different conference being first or second team all conference players. I did vote Evan Williams, I should say that, as a second team defensive back for Oregon. That's what he was ranked as. I did look at it as, hey, this is like a bona fide NFL player, but I didn't even feel comfortable putting him in on the first team when maybe he could have been. Maybe. I just had issues because he's never played at the Pac-12 level before. But like the reasons I bring this up is like Travis Hunter, played FCS football and transferred from Jackson State. I know he's a 5-star. I know he was a tremendous athlete, but he was a freshman last year at Jackson State University. He is honorable mention receiver. He is first team defense, and he's a first team specialist. That's a big leap from going from playing HBCU schools to playing at the Pac-12. The talent levels are not the same. I know he's a 5-star, but that's a big assumption. There's a couple other guys on here that, there's just been some thoughts. Well, maybe this guy's just going to transition right away. Like I had a hard time with Jordan Birch. I had a hard time with Justin Jacobs. Guys that I think Duck fans are saying, hey, these guys are going to be studs, or Johnny Cornelius or Junior Angelout. Some of these guys who are probably going to start be transfers from other schools. I just have a hard time justifying putting them in. Definitely first team, and even second team, I had a hard time doing it.
And you can tell you're not the only one who had a hard time with that. Because as to your point, not a lot of the players on these lists, you mentioned Travis Hunter. I think that's an outlier of guys that are new to the conference that are on these. I think that's going to be, and by the way, I just scrolling here, I think that's Colorado's only player on either team. So maybe that was almost like a sympathy vote of like, okay, if we're going to give one guy, let's put him on the first team. I don't know. But yeah, no, to your point, you look through here, what you're seeing a lot of are, at least from my perspective, and I think I have a pretty good feel for around the league, is guys that were quality starters last year that weren't star players are on the second team defense in particular here. I think in part because there just weren't a lot of options of returning guys, and these awards are so much based upon, are based upon past performance. And to Matt's point, it's hard to know what translates and what doesn't. And I think it's notable that Evan Williams is on the second team. It's the only it's the only Oregon transfer this year on a team. But I think that's going to be kind of the norm here for a minute while the portal, and I think the portal will continue to be obviously extremely active. We had Cooper Patagna on right before I went on vacation. He outlined, how prevalent the portal is and how it's not going to change at all. I think this is going to be kind of the year in and year out charade with this, where you look at it and you go, well, we're probably missing a third of the best players in the conference that just transferred in that aren't on these teams. And I bet you these teams are going to look so much different at the end of the year here, because there are guys on here who were like okay players on decent teams last year that are on the second team that probably aren't better than a lot of the new players that are coming into the conference that you just aren't accounting for. And I think Matt obviously wasn't alone in terms of assessing this and going, I don't know, is this guy really going to be like, unless the guy's a complete superstar, which I think people think Travis Hunter might be, it's hard to, I think, to put a guy on a first or second team basically sight unseen when there are guys who've been in the conference and these who've started and produced at a decent level who are returning.
Like one guy, like even some guys transferring within the conference.
Sure.
It was kind of a little like not quite sure how to feel about this. Christian Roland Wallace, I think, was basically like a 4-year starter at Arizona at cornerback.
Right.
Multiple years was in contention for all conference honors. And he didn't even he made honorable mention at USC. And I don't know that it's the transfer portal is definitely gonna make things interesting. One that caught my eye, and I don't understand this one. Like, and people could, if you're a non-Duck fan, could accuse us of we didn't win him anyway. But like, Justin Flo was an honorable mention pick at linebacker for Arizona, and to get honorable mention, it means you had to have 4 or more voters put your name in. I don't know how many total voters there were, but I just don't know what he has done in his first 2 seasons to say yes. Like, he's been hurt both years, and then what has he shown you that justifies that he's going to be, an all-conference caliber player? It's interesting. There's definitely these preseason awards are always interesting. You get some eye shockers. I think the biggest one is Travis Hunter. I really hope he lives up to the billing, because that's pretty cool. If we could see a all conference, whether it's honorable mention, first or second team player at 3 different positions, would go down as maybe one of the best seasons individually in probably conference history.
To your Justin Flo point, yeah, it was actually 3 years. He was hurt his whole freshman year, missed basically all of the 2021 season. And then last year, we all know that was kind of he was healthy for parts of the year at least, and just wasn't a very good producer. So yeah,
wasn't playable.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's tough on the voters here because again, you're assessing what's returning, but because so much of the league is also transferring out and then replacing it with new players, like I think it's probably harder than ever to put together these teams. I'm thankful I'm not one of the people who does. Do we want to go to some more?
Yeah,
we kind of talked through all of this. Camden Lewis is also on the second team, which I think is he's deserving of that. Did you have anybody who was an honorable mention that was on one of your ballots from Oregon?
Let me pull up the Oregon ballot, like the email from trustee and very important Nate Kruger, the SID. No, looking at the list, the honorable mentions: Bo Nix, Troy Franklin, Terrence Ferguson, Jackson Powers Johnson, Josh Carnley Jr., Johnny Cornelius, Jordan Birch, Jeffrey Bossa, Triquez Bridges, and Nico Reed. I did not vote JPJ, Cornelius, or Reed into anything, into any of the first or second teams. So the fact that they got some votes is a little bit surprising to me. I did vote Terrence Ferguson's second team all conference tight end. He was honorable mention. I struggled with Connerly. I put him in at the last spot for the second team offensive line.
Right.
I really struggled there with him because he hasn't played a lot, but when he did play this past season, he was really good. He's a 5-star guy. Maybe you could argue JPJ is more deserving of the award than Connerly just because he's played more. He's actually got a couple starts under his belt. Maybe that was a mistake there by me, but I chose to go with Connerly. I picked a little bit of potential there. And then Bridges and Bossa and Birch I had as honorable mention or all conference kind of selections there.
To the offensive line, I'm going to be stunned if no Oregon players on the first or second team. I think Oregon's got a lot of talent there, but also to the point Matt just made, like none of it's proven within this conference. I mean, Connerly is kind of the name that you would expect, even though he's never started, to be on the second team based upon the Justin Flo, Travis Hunter math we just kind of outlined, where big time 5-star recruit. In this case, he's actually played a little bit in the conference. I think he only played about 115 snaps last year. I was just looking at it. So not a ton, but enough where you can say he's not a bust. Yeah, JPJ and Johnny Cornelius are two guys who I think will definitely be there. I think there's, I think there's a lot of parts of this offensive line that get me excited. Those are probably the three that stand out most. I think the Nico Reed one, that's interesting. Because again, I guess it's, how are people reading into Oregon's depth chart at corner? Because they do have Triquez Bridges on there as well. So both of Oregon's corners on the honorable mention list. But I think most of us think Kyrie Jackson probably has a leg up. Nico Reed, of course, hasn't enrolled, wasn't here for spring. I just found that interesting. I know he has played quite a bit, was a pretty productive player at Colorado. Wasn't like he was a star player though, and I guess I'm just a little surprised he was included there over Kyrie, who I guess, again, if we're using past performance, it's not like Kyrie did very much at Alabama either. But the projections, at least from what we saw in spring, feel like Kyrie's in better standing. But again, Reed wasn't here, so it's hard to say.
And that's where I struggled, like with Kyrie Jackson and Tysheem Johnson. Both guys had stellar careers. I shouldn't say stellar, but they were starters at SEC schools,
right?
And Tysheem's was definitely more stellar than Kyrie's. But these are two guys that come from a conference that's historically known to be elite on the defensive side of the football, and they started multiple years. And I was like, they're newcomers. I don't really want to throw them in here too much because they weren't like elite All-American superstar transfers. But at the same time, they come from a conference that's simply better at defense than the Pac-12. Maybe they should jump in here into the mix. But yeah, kind of surprised that neither of those guys got honorable mention. But again, to your point, like you brought up earlier, it's actually really hard to make these voting happen. And it's kind of, honestly, we were talking about it off the air a couple of days ago. It's kind of overwhelming because you look at it and you got like, I don't know, close to 200 names you have to go through, and you want to do a good job, but that's still really hard.
And just one last thought on the defensive back transfer thing. I think the thing that's interesting is, as somebody who covers the program and is around it, and I think kind of has a feel for the fan pulse, and maybe we don't always agree. I would say of the incoming transfer defensive backs, I think Reed's probably the one that has the lowest expectations among fans, probably, right? Like I would say Evan Williams, Tysheem Johnson, and Kyrie Jackson, and probably in that order, and then Nico Reed. So it's just interesting to see that the conference, across the conference, to project that the expectations are a little different. Evan Williams being second team, Nico being on the honorable mention, and the other two guys we mentioned. I'm really high on Tysheem. Like I think he's very much deserving of, and I'm kind of surprised that he's not on here. But again, the conference voters are at least familiar with Nico Reed. They obviously haven't watched as much of Tysheem Johnson. And by the end of the season, everybody will have far more evidence to make these decisions. And I think the voting will be a lot easier postseason as it is preseason.
Is there anyone honorable mention that you feel like should have gotten on the list? You asked me that question.
Yeah, only fair. I think Taishim, as I mentioned, I think makes sense as somebody who probably should be on there. I'm with you. This is hard though, because I as somebody who's been in these situations where you're trying to vote for teams and go through it all, it's a lot harder than people give it credit. People oftentimes are like, what? They don't watch the games. They don't know. Well, they might watch other games than what you're watching is part of the issue here. You're watching your team play, and other people are watching those teams play. So I'm understanding of it. I guess one other player defensively, Justin Jacobs is going to start. I think there's pretty high expectations for him. I'm also understanding coming from a different conference part, but I think the transfers as a whole are going to be the hardest ones to get right here because it's tough to have the pulse of each program especially because it's, in this case, spring that happened a couple of months ago. How many of these guys are you actually able to watch? So I get it, but there are a couple of those transfers I probably would have had on here, and maybe one or two I wouldn't.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to dive into Pac-12 Media Day. Eric and I will both be there, kind of looking forward, looking ahead to what we hope to see, what we think we'll see, maybe some ideas of some topics we'll hope to discuss. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Pac-12 Media Day, July 21st in Las Vegas at the World Resorts properties, the north end of the Strip in Las Vegas. Eric and I will be there bright and early. Kicks off at 8 a.m. with a George Kliavkoff press conference that starts, I think, around 8:15. And it's going to be a loaded event. You've got a Heisman candidate, or not Heisman candidate. You've got a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback in Caleb Williams. He will be speaking at that event. We've also got multiple Heisman candidates who will be speaking in that event. We've got head coaches, Dan Lanning. We've got head coaches like Deion Sanders. I don't know if that's clicked yet in your head, Eric. I did a radio interview a couple of days ago where it's like, yeah, do you want to try and talk to Deion Sanders? What would you say to Deion Sanders? And it was kind of like, I hadn't really thought of that. And that's a guy that growing up, like that was like one of my favorite players. I probably should think about that for a second. It's a loaded event for the Pac-12 on Friday.
I have no idea what I'd say to Deion Sanders, and I think it's best I don't have anything to say there because there's probably people who have a lot better questions than I would for Deion Sanders. I'm excited for Colorado to have whatever this is because it's way more exciting than whatever it's been in the past, right? So, like there should be excitement for Colorado. The Pac-12 media deal, whatever is going on with that, it doesn't sound like we'll get any resolution on Friday.
Yeah, what but they've got to address it, right? Like we know, you or I won't ask this question, but we know there's going to be a national columnist who's going to be there that's going to ask questions about the media deal. And for them to come out and basically someone in the conference leak out to a bunch of people that they're not going to talk about it, like they're not going to announce it.
But it's close.
It's a bad look, man.
But it's really close. They're on the goal line right now. They're about to punch it in. No, I agree. We don't really talk about it much on this podcast because there just hasn't been much to talk about, and it's honestly kind of depressing to look at what's potentially happening. But yeah, we won't have any final resolution. I'm sure that'll be a topic of much discussion. This is random, but one of the things I'm most excited about is talking to some Utah people about what the heck's going on with Cameron Rising because I was doing my preseason projections for the conference, it was really hard to know what to do with Utah. They're the two-time defending conference champions, but their quarterback situation is a little perplexing right now with some injury stuff. So like his availability, what that looks like, I think is notable if we're just going big picture conference stuff. And then, yeah, I guess I'm just really intrigued to kind of hear what all the returning quarterbacks have to say. Now, I actually haven't looked at the list. I assume DJ Uiagalelei is representing Oregon State for offense. Is that the case?
Oregon State has Anthony Gould,
Okay, so
and
no DJ.
Keaton Oladapo.
So I was curious to see what he might have to say about joining this conference. But yeah, I think there's a lot from other schools that are interesting. From an Oregon perspective, we haven't heard anything from Dan Lanning about how the offseason's gone, right? Like he hasn't been on record as far as I'm aware for a couple of months, at least doing an extensive interview. It'll be good to catch up, see kind of where they are, what his perspective is on how the offseason's gone, the onboarding process with all these true freshmen that came in. We haven't heard much on them. So I think there's some base storylines there. And then, of course, you're always kind of curious coming off a season last year where a lot was available at the end of the season, a lot that wasn't accomplished, kind of what the offseason was like in terms of making sure some of those things get rectified. Because I think the two of us, Jared, Oregon fans, it's pretty obvious some of the things Oregon needed to work on this offseason. I'd be curious to see and hear kind of what Dan has to say about some of those.
I'd like to get with Dan, and we always we talk. I felt like last year there was a lot of like, hey, how did you learn from this experience? Because it was his first ever as a head coach. And
sure.
while I don't always like those questions, I do think it's tangible on this point of how better prepared are you for year 2 than you were for year 1? Because maybe better prepared isn't the right word, but year 1 had a lot of highs, but there were also some pretty bad lows for this team. Whether it was the Washington collapse of letting that game get away from them, and you could argue maybe it was more so of a player, Bo Nix, getting hurt than
sure.
decision making from a coaching staff. There were some interesting decisions made in that game, and you can't blame Bo Nix for getting hurt. And we're not saying that, but the Oregon State game, the lead that you had, and then the manner in which you lost that game, where Oregon State, I don't think, completed a pass in the second half, and still came back and won.
Yeah.
Like, how better prepared are you for year 2 now? What's where's the growth? And we often hear coaches talk about like, hey, year 1 to year 2 for a player, there's a big jump. I'm assuming there's got to be a big jump from year 1 to year 2 for a coach too.
Here's another one. Last year, your marquee non-conference game, you got absolutely waxed away from home. This year, not anywhere near of an opponent as Georgia, but Texas Tech is no one to kind of sneeze at. And that's early on in your season away from home. Are you guys ready to go into a hostile environment and perform better? Because, again, last year it was really disappointing. They really didn't. I know there were a couple of drives offensively where they could have cashed them in. The score might look different, but the defense was just steamrolled the whole game, and it really wasn't competitive. Obviously, you can't have a repeat of that this year. That puts the season on a completely different foot than a lot of people expect. I think many people are anticipating Oregon will be 3-0 when they open conference play against Colorado, and if they drop that game, that's a big one. So I'll be curious, and we probably won't get too much into Texas Tech stuff because Dan won't want to go there. They do have a game before that. But I'll be curious to hear just kind of as we get closer to that. This might be a question for later, just of what did you learn from how last year's first marquee game was in non-conference play, and how has that altered what they're doing this year? Because I think that's you ran through the highs and lows of last year. It's easy to be really encouraged by everything that happened after that first game, but that first game still did happen, and it was, again, really disappointing.
Do you feel like last year we could cut the tension in the air with a butter knife? Like, it was because that was right around when, wasn't it right around when USC and UCLA announced that they were gone, or was it a year before?
Well, that was that was several months before, but yeah, a couple months.
Yeah. So like, it was pretty hostile. It felt like in that room there was a lot of tension, not amongst the media, but just like media to media. But it just felt different than previous years. And I'm curious now that we know we're going into the last year of the Pac-12's current format, and one in which 2 long-standing members are leaving that are going to, they're taking a huge recruiting pipeline, a huge TV market away from the conference. And on top of the lack of a media deal, like, I'll be curious to know what the tenor of the press conference is going to be like. Does George Kliavkoff, when he speaks, is he going to be on the defensive? Is he going to be trying to push narratives that just don't hold a lot of water, a la Larry Scott. Like he was very clear, like, hey, this league is crumbling, and Scott comes out here and boasts about how the conference is the conference of champions, and it's winning and rowing and cricket and gymnastics and all these other sports that have nothing to do with football. When it's like, yeah, but you're falling behind in football. Or like, what does Lincoln Riley or Chip Kelly do when they come out and speak with the media? It's just going to be interesting. This is the last year, as we know, the Pac-12 in its current format will ever be around, and I'm just curious to see what the tenor of the room is going to be like. It could be a whole bunch of different areas, in my opinion.
No, that's a really good point, Matt, and I hadn't really considered all those dynamics. And I mean, last year, Klyabkov did address USC and UCLA and said, hey, they're still member schools, and while they're member schools, they're just like everybody else. I wonder if that'll be the same kind of letter of enthusiasm. Because recall last year, UCLA, Klyabkov was still kind of indicating, well, they still have to go through their own state and court and make sure everything gets. And he was saying, well, the door's still open for them to come back. So maybe he was presenting a little bit more of a welcoming situation. I'll be curious to see if that tenor changes at all. I don't expect him to be too adversarial, but it is kind of a weird situation. And then I'll be curious to see, is there a coach or a player that gets kind of out of line and maybe says something, not that they're going to say anything too harsh, but this has to feel like a betrayal, certainly for the fan bases. I'm sure for those in the rooms and in the recruiting offices and in the football practices, there's a level of that sense too. So how does that get communicated, or if it does at all? Is it Dion who's, probably the most media savvy, but also the most probably immune to criticism because he's so, such a household name? Is he the one who says something kind of a sharp turn, or does he even have the history in the conference to say it, considering this is his first year? I'll be curious. Like Herm Edwards, I think last year maybe said a couple of things that were kind of about it because, again, similar deal where you're pretty established, and obviously he's no longer around. But yeah, right. There is certainly the dynamics are very different these last 2 years than they've been for previous iterations of this. And this being the final in this conference in this form, it'll be very interesting to see kind of what the feeling is. And to your point about Lincoln Riley and Chip Kelly, yeah, how do they handle it? They're going to get peppered with some probably more difficult questions than some of their counterparts. Does that make them? Are they prepared for that? How does that all play out? I think it'd be very interesting.
After media day, we'll come back home, and then that next week, Oregon will host a Saturday Night Live event. They will host their own Pac-12 media, or not Pac-12, but Oregon Media Day event. And then shortly after that, fall camp will have started for the Oregon Ducks. We're less than 2.5 weeks away, 3 weeks away from the start of the season. I would highly encourage you guys to go to duckterritory.com for more coverage of Pac-12 Media Day. Also sign up if you're thinking about signing up for a duckterritory.com membership. We've got an opportunity where, depending on when you listen to this, July 20th, the day we leave, we're gonna offer a 50% off VIP membership. I highly encourage you guys to take an opportunity for that. An annual membership gets you all of football season, all of signing day. If you join it right now, you get an opportunity to follow both the men's and the women's basketball programs. You get to go through the recruiting process cycles for those. You also get Jared's baseball coverage of the baseball team, which was one win away from making it to Omaha. You get spring football on top of that. Honestly, like if you're going to subscribe to duckterritory.com right now is for an annual membership, right now is probably the best time because you get all of that and you get it for 50% off, and you'll be able to jump right into the season. So I highly encourage you guys to do that. Take an opportunity of that, spread the word for that. And until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.